As many of you know, I lived in a Buddhist temple in the United States for 6 years. I never stopped being a Unitarian Universalist. In fact, I attended seminary during that time, or part of that time. But I loved the precision of the spiritual path that Buddhism laid out. I study in the Zen tradition. And in that tradition, there is a list called the 6 paramitas, or the 6 perfections. And they define the path of awakening as containing 6 qualities. They are generosity, ethics, patience, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom. So you can tell that I'm still working on these, right? But that's the goal. Those are the ones we strive for. And we're taught that we each already have all of these 6 perfect qualities, but they end up being covered up by our greed and selfishness and delusion and karmic tendencies. So it's not that we have to learn how to be generous. We are generous already, but because we don't understand ourselves, our true selves, we act in selfish ways. So by seeking our true self, according to Buddhist teaching, we will come to understand that we are completely interwoven with all of existence. And people who understand that we're interwoven have no need to act selfishly because they don't feel separate. Selfishness and greed are derivatives of believing that you are separate and therefore you need to withhold or hoard. So if we all have these qualities already, the 6 perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, perseverance, concentration, and wisdom, we cultivate our understanding of them by removing what are called the defilements that cover them up. And we do this through our daily habits and actions, which is something that we talked about last week. Right? We become what we rehearse. And our sensitivity to this begins with recognizing that these defilements don't come from some other place or are somehow part of our nature. Like, you're not a sinner because someone in the past ate an apple. That's not inherent to you. And not all, but many of the hindrances that we experience in life occur, unfortunately, because we're creating them, right? Not someone else. Mental habits. Now, this is why it's necessary to do the work required for cultivating a spiritual life. This is what allows us to see the defilements that are covering up our true nature. And you might think of it like cleaning the windshield of your car. You know, if you drive around, if you use your car, stuff just accumulates on it, right? If you never use your wipers, stuff just accumulates. It's not good or bad, it's just part of driving. But if you don't clean your windshield, then the car becomes dangerous to drive. And in this way, we engage in spiritual practices to clean the windshield of our lives, because stuff just accumulates. And if we don't deal with it, we behave in ways that are unhealthy for us and others. Now, there's a reason why generosity is the first paramita, the first perfection on the list. Generosity comes from a profound sense of belonging. It comes from believing in our interconnected nature. The Sanskrit word is dana, which means voluntary, like just a voluntary giving, a giving of material, of wisdom, of time. And cultivating the practice of dana helps us overcome our self-centeredness, because we're cultivating an understanding of ourselves as giving people, as generous people. And because Buddhism is so nuanced, the texts are very clear that the perfection of generosity isn't actually the action or the act of giving, it's the intention. So our intention is very important, because there are lots of people who give with the idea of getting in return. That's different, right? It's different than dana. Embedded in their giving, embedded in their generosity, is a desire for some type of reward. It's a quid pro quo. But Dana is not concerned with who is worthy, who's not worthy. Will I get something? Will I not get something? We give simply to cultivate the practice of trying to be a generous person. Now, several years ago, I interviewed an American Buddhist nun for a podcast I was hosting, and she spoke about her training in Japan and how part of her practice as a nun was to go begging for food and other support. And she explained that here in the United States, we interpret this act as a practice that might cultivate humility in the monastic. But the Buddhist culture has a different concept of generosity. What she was actually doing was giving the people who were putting food and other resources in her bowl the opportunity to practice generosity. She was giving them an opportunity. So from our cultural standpoint, we see the act of putting food in the bowl as charity. From the Buddhist perspective, it's an opportunity to spiritually confront the selfishness that we wrestle with on a daily basis. In this case, do I have enough food to put a little rice in the nun's bowl? The people were not helping the nun by putting food in the bowl. The nun was helping the people become generous, which ultimately meant that they would suffer less because generous people experience less attachment. So the nun goes begging to help people suffer less. Generosity is the cure for our afflictions of greed, cruelty, and possessiveness. Now, this is also why I think that church is so important. At its best, when church is really at its best, church and other worship communities, right? We seek to be countercultural by finding ways to help us cultivate generosity. When a church is missional in its focus, it's not thinking about bringing in new members or finding leaders. It's focused on creating opportunities to help other people become generous, ethical, patient, and wise. If a church succeeds in that mission, members and leaders are drawn to the community naturally because you don't have to search for them. They want to belong to such a place. Now, Buddhists, because they love their lists, and I mean they love their lists. There are so many lists. Within the 6 paramitas, it gets even deeper, right? So on the first one, generosity, dana, there are 4 levels to dana, right? And so the 4 different aspects of the first paramita are being generous with our material possessions. Second, being generous with our words. Third, being generous with our thoughts. And the 4th, being generous with our time. With our time. Now, each of these 4 aspects of generosity has a contrasting hindrance that reinforces our self-centeredness and our selfishness. And it doesn't take a skilled practitioner to realize that the less generous we are with our material possessions, our words, our thoughts, and our time, the more we are reinforcing our self-centeredness and selfishness in each of these areas. I think that's pretty logical. Material generosity is the first on the list because it is the easiest. It's the first on the list because it's the easiest. You can round up your bill at the supermarket by donating a few cents with the simple hit of a button. Very easy. You can give money for a tax write-off. You can give money to an organization that you really believe in some way. But material giving is the least difficult. Being generous with what we say does not mean that we say a lot. It means being kind and compassionate and thoughtful about the impact of our words. We all know that we can say kind and compassionate words while still reserving space in our thoughts that are not very kind and compassionate. Bless your heart. It's one of my favorites, right? And when we're not very careful with this, or we're not very skilled with this, it actually comes out as passive aggression, right? Oh, I love that thing that you're wearing today. Gosh, you can just wear anything, right? our supposedly kind words reveal our thoughts that are not kind. And beyond generosity of thought is the generosity of time, which is often interpreted as people who pass along wisdom that they were given freely. Generous words inspire us and encourage us and others to believe in ourselves. Generous thoughts are not just thinking well of somebody, but actively engaging in the cultivation of a generous mind. And the generosity of time is the willingness to sit with others through difficulty, to help them learn, to keep them company, to pass along something that someone passed along to us. It's one of the areas that we love to hoard the most, right? Because we never feel like we have enough time. And then the Buddhists add a special quality of time for those who share the Dharma, that is, those who share the teaching Buddhism, in an effort to help people realize their true selves so that they suffer less. So people who take time out of their lives to help people understand why we suffer and to show them the path, right? It's a special quality of Buddhism, we say. Now, in our case, this might look like inviting a friend to church, because we don't have a set of lists and a sort of organized, systematic theology that teaches us about how to relieve suffering. We believe, really, that suffering is reduced when you're embedded in a community, that here we experience transformation with each other. Now, this last stage of generosity is a problem for many people in Unitarian Universalist churches because we're very uncomfortable inviting people to church. I get it. Like most progressive Canadians, we'd rather talk about anything. Our salary, our voting record, we'd even rather talk about our sex lives before we talk about our church with one another, right? Religion is private. That's the Canadian way. This isn't the United States where people put it on bumper stickers. And the Canadian sociologist Reginald Bibby calls it polite detachment. Polite detachment. Canadians are not hostile to religion. They're just disengaged. And the prevailing cultural script says, if people wanted to be here, they would be here. Inviting people to church feels rude almost. It's like we're breaking the social contract. And if you're from Quebec and you were raised Catholic, you carry an extra weight, right? The Quiet Revolution was a rejection of the church's control, and your grandparents fought to free Quebec from clerical overreach, from a time when the church told you how many children to have or who you could marry or what books you could read. So any behavior that smells like recruitment triggers a historical trauma, feels like regressing to a pre-modern era of religious obligation and social coercion. So somewhere along the way, we learned the respectful thing is to leave people alone. Now, Bibby's research shows that Canadians haven't lost their spiritual hunger. In fact, interest in spiritual matters is still quite high. People are still searching for meaning in their lives. What has collapsed is religious participation, particularly here in Quebec, where weekly attendance dropped from 90% in the 1950s to under 5% today. He goes on to say that religious groups are largely responsible for their own decline because they've ceased to engage the market of meaning effectively. People aren't avoiding church out of hostility today. They're just never meaningfully asked. They're not meaningfully asked. And communities that don't invite people don't stay stable. They enter into death spiral. The average age rises, the energy drops, the creativity wanes, and then one day someone stands up at a meeting and says, this is really hard, maybe we should close. Now, this is happening right now to Canadian churches. The Anglican Church, for example, is projected to crater to nearly zero by 2040. It's 15 years from now. And the United Church is facing similar problems. These aren't bad churches. They're not theologically bankrupt. They're polite Canadian churches that stopped inviting, and now they're dying from benign neglect. And the irony is that we think we're respecting people's autonomy by staying quiet, but what we're actually doing is abandoning them to loneliness. We're abandoning them to loneliness. So for months now, we've talked about the loneliness crisis and how this has led to a rise in the powers of Moloch and acedia, and the powers of overconsumption, because we don't know, like we just buy things to satisfy this sort of spiritual hunger we have, this hunger that we live with, the meaning, and this overwhelming sense of not caring that is gripping our culture. And this isn't just us, right? Industrialized nations around the world are dealing with widespread social isolation and the effects that come with us. And last week I shared one of the most startling statistics that I've seen to date, which was this 2010 study that found the absence of social connection carries a mortality risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The absence of social connection carries a mortality risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This isn't just being sad, right? This is about a culture that's in denial about the free fall that we're experiencing, and it's killing us. We're just seeing institutions vanish, and we're not sure how to connect anymore. Literally. And hopefully, those of you who are members here don't feel this way because you've found a container that feeds you. Right? Some of you have discovered that the more you invest here, the more fed you are. Right? But it still feels wrong to invite somebody to share the companionship that you've found. Now, this has, in part, something to do with our biology. Right? Inviting someone risks being told no. Neuroscientists at the University of New South Wales discovered that social rejection activates the same part of your brain where we experience physical pain. So your brain doesn't distinguish between social pain and physical pain. That what's being activated in your brain is the same part, like as if you break your arm. So no one likes to be told to hear no, right? And by now, you're probably intuiting that I'm going to ask you to start inviting people. Because I am going to do that. And you're likely already hearing like, no thanks in your head because your nervous system treats that like a threat, right? Your brain is trying to protect you from pain. But we also have reward centers in our brain, and when we engage in acts of generosity and kindness, we get a feeling of euphoria. It's called the helper's high. And your brain rewards generosity the same way it rewards pleasure. But it goes deeper than that. In a study of recovering alcoholics, those who sponsored and supported new members were twice as likely to stay sober 1 year later compared to those who didn't help others. And in another study that found that chronic pain sufferers who counseled other pain patients experienced measurable reduction in their own pain level. Generosity isn't costly. It's not costly. It's physiologically rewarding. So the issue that I'm asking you to wrestle with is, what are we going to do about this loneliness crisis that is literally shortening people's lives and fracturing our culture? Does it remain in our heads like some bit of intellectual trivia, like, oh my God, I had no idea like it was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes. That's awful, Or are we going to try to help people in our community? Are we willing to risk the possibility of some pain, because someone says no thank you, in the hope that we might help somebody not feel just less lonely, but actually feel connected in this world? Last month we talked about what a member is. And the month, in the study groups, I was calling it no passengers, only crew. There's no passengers, only crew. We're all here together. We're all pulling together. And this month we've been, in the study group, we've been talking about it as the knock on the door. Are you going to answer the knock at the door? So last month I defined a member as people who hold on to each other, right? And then we are also held together by the sacred promises that we make to one another, which we call the covenant. So the sermons this month are trying to illustrate not what a member is, but what a member does. And I would like to believe that a member of this community is willing to risk violating the social contract of politeness that's crept into our lives, that has left all of us lonely, in the hopes of trying to help someone rediscover meaning and connection in their lives. This isn't about recruitment. This is about being the people who want to do something about those honestly terrifying statistics. Last week I mentioned that 43% of people over 50 in Canada are at a risk of social isolation. 59% experience loneliness. And then the study out of the University of Montreal found that 68% of teens and young adults 18 to 34 report a lack of belonging. And when people feel so isolated, nihilism spirals, which impacts our politics, how we treat the environment and immigrants. So who is going to help these people cultivate a sense of belonging? Mark Carney? He's not. He's not. That's not what he does. It's us. It's me and you. We need to be we need a more generous spirit in our culture, one that says people don't get left behind. And generosity comes from a profound sense of belonging. So we can take the sense of belonging we have here and give it outward. So now, or between now and Christmas Eve, I'm going to ask you to practice the begging bowl. Think of one person, someone who might be searching for some meaning, someone who might be lonely, someone who might benefit from what we have here, from what you've benefited from. And I want you to invite them, not to join forever, not to become a member, just to come with you to the Christmas Eve service, which, is a little odd because it's probably our most Christian service of the year. Right? But you can tell them that we do other things too, right? But it's a beautiful evening. And you'll sit together. And you'll experience the candlelight and the carols and the readings together. And you'll practice generosity together. And I know that this feels like you'll be violating the social contract and being very un-Canadian. But Canadians invite people to do lots of things that we care about. Hockey games, book clubs, hockey games, restaurants. We don't force it. We just like to share our enthusiasm. Go Habs. And there we go. And I want to give a shout out to Patricia Spenceley from a sermon about the Barbie sermon a few months ago. She was so inspired by the sermon. She held a Barbie viewing meeting at the Manoir. Now it turns out they didn't like the movie at all. So I think I need to go and visit and be like, this is why I love that movie. But this is what it's about, right? About taking what you hear, not necessarily from me, but from other people here, and going and saying, there is something special about being in community. We do something special. We learn generosity together. This is a good quality for our culture, for our society, for our city. we can say genuinely, this place matters to me. And it might speak to you, and I would love for you to experience that. That doesn't violate Canadian politeness, that honors friendship. And you're offering something meaningful because the world is lonely and isolating, and our culture is driving us to hoard and be fearful, and it's very unhealthy. But here we're trying to cultivate willingness, gratitude, generosity, agency, and hope so that we can transform our lives. This is the gift that we offer. This is the begging bowl that we hold out. And in doing so, maybe we can create a new kind of Canadian religious culture, one that isn't coercive like the old church, but one that isn't silent and detached like the current culture. And in this new culture, maybe we can find a way for people to be cared for and to learn how to care for others in return.